Hi, everybody. It's your friend James Shaw. Thanks so much for joining us. We're doing what we do, which is talking to elite people doing elite things. And I came across an author not long ago named Thomas Curran. He wrote a book called The Perfection Trap. And I've been reading it and I'm going, whoa, 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 whoa. I know so many people who struggle with this. And I said, Tom, would you come on and unpack this for our community? Because I think maybe how we perceive perception or perfection and then how we can get through it is a little different than what you might expect, and it's opened my eyes. So Thomas, thanks for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And now we already know we're in for something good because you've got an accent, and people with accents are smarter than people that don't. Tell us about who you are and where you are, and a little bit about what you do, and then we'll jump into your book.
Absolutely. So I am currently an associate professor at London School of Economics, which means I'm based in London. And as you mentioned, my area of expertise is perfectionism. So that's what my book is about. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And this is a thing that comes up, especially with entrepreneurs, high achievers. They struggle with this thing of perfection, and I hear it all the time. And what I notice is a couple of things. It leads to inaction for some people, and then it leads to I don't know, underwhelm in their success. In other words, they achieve great success but don't feel satisfied. Would you agree that those are two ways that perfectionism can show up for an entrepreneur or a high achiever?
Absolutely. Of course, you're going to see perfectionism pop up in those elite settings because perfectionism is a personality characteristic that drives us forward. And if you've got plenty of time and you're young and lots of energy, you can carry perfectionism with you. And there's an argument to suggest it's going to lead to success in the short term. But it's not a long-term performance strategy. And I think a lot of people who have perfectionism have had to work really hard to temper some of its more aggressive elements because it can create a lot of exhaustion, a lot of worry and doubt about whether we're doing enough, a lot of hypercriticality on ourselves, particularly when things haven't gone well or we've made a mistake. And all of that culminates in some really tricky mental health difficulties and ultimately performance difficulties too.
What I found interesting as I've read through this is the perfectionism is really a societal issue. It's created in the space we're in or the environment we're in or just society as a whole. And you break it down like that. So let's just kind of follow the outline of the book and tell us, how do you define perfectionism?
Perfectionism is a personality characteristic, and it's not really a black or white trait. So it's not a good idea to think about yourself as a perfectionist and somebody else as not a perfectionist. It's on a spectrum, and we all have a certain degree of perfectionism within us. Some a lot, some not very much, some in the middle, or most in the middle, and everywhere in between. And there are three main characteristics or types of perfectionism that we see time and time again in people who have high levels of perfectionism. So they say they have high self-set goals, high expectations and pressures on themselves. This is called self-oriented perfectionism. But they also feel too a very strong social pressure. They feel other people expect them to be perfect and are watching and waiting to pounce when they've made a mistake. This is called socially prescribed perfectionism. And then there's a third type of perfectionism that we see time and time again, and that's other-oriented perfectionism, which is perfectionism turned outwards onto other people. So I expect you to be perfect. Now, we can all score somewhere along the spectrum of these three elements of perfectionism, and some might be high on self and low on social, or vice versa, which is what makes perfection really interesting. There's no one size fits all. But those are the three core dimensions. And that's how we measure it. That's how we determine how it impacts on things like mental health and performance. And so that's really where the story starts when it comes to perfectionism.
It seems as if you're someone that is a high achiever, that if you never finish satisfied, the attack on your mental well-being would be huge. That would be it would just you would always feel unfinished or never enough, and that seems like a tough way to end a day.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about this being an unsustainable way to go about business or work or sports or education or whatever it might be that you're currently striving towards. it's not sustainable. Yeah, it might lift you up above other people in the short term, but you're going to need a more sustainable way of operating than perfectionism once you're there. Because if you continually feel like you're not enough, if you continue to think that no matter how high you go, even objectively exceptional performance is met with a sense that I need to do more. Because of course that success creates a new floor, right? So the better you do, the better you feel like you're expected to do. And there's no place for contentment, there's no place for joy, there's no place for satisfaction in that world, because you're constantly striving after more and more and more. I think our challenge as high performers is to recognize that there comes a point in our trajectory where we've made it over the line, right? Like we've now elite. And so we need to switch gears a little bit and figure out what's a more sustainable way to strive, where we can continue with that high performance, but perhaps dispense with some of those self-critical elements of perfectionism that will never allow us to feel enough.
Yeah, it seemed. I mean, definitely, we want to achieve, we want to succeed, we want to get better, we want to grow, and yet sometimes we do want to end the day feeling satisfied. Hey, I showed up my best today. I got it done. So for that person who struggles with that, who doesn't leave satisfied, who always is going, well, I could have done more. Well, I could have done more. What advice would you give to that person to be able to separate the desire to grow from these perfectionistic sort of issues that are coming up?
The main one is recognizing that your work is also your vocation. I think that this gets lost a lot in modern culture, where we're constantly worried about the output. But often at times we can't control the output. Sometimes things will go well, sometimes they won't. That's not really within our gift to control all the time. Sometimes it is, but a lot of the time it isn't. So I think at some point in our career trajectory, growth is fine at the very beginning when we're trying to work out our way in a certain field. We're trying to learn skills. We're trying to master whether it's a certain type of business or a certain type of code or a certain profession, whatever it might be. We need a lot of growth. We need to push ourselves sometimes beyond comfort, and that's okay. But that's to come a point where we go back to our why. What's our vocation? Why are we even here? Why did we set out on this journey in the first place? And rekindle a little bit of that energy, and think about, okay, well, what am I leaving in the world now? Not think about me or my own ego. Let's take that away from this process and ask yourself, what are you leaving in the world? What is it that you're doing for other people, that your product or your service is providing to give them something that they enjoy, or provides them with information, or enriches their life in some way? That has to then be the motivation that takes over from our own personal self-interest of growing, because that type of motivation doesn't preclude success, and in many ways it can create more success, because that's what really catches fire when it comes to our passions and interests. It makes us more creative and more innovative. And so Simon Sinek talks a lot about discovering our why. I think is a very, very powerful message, and I would definitely encourage people who are struggling with perfectionism and they're high achiever to sit down and think, okay, what I'm doing is also my vocation, my calling in some ways. So what is it that I'm leaving in the world? How am I making life, the world, a better place? And what am I leaving in the world? And those are the things to really hook onto when it comes to your motivation.
It seems like once you are clear about the value you provide and the value you give to others, and once you get clarity around that, this perfectionism issue could drop some. Is that right?
Absolutely, because you're no longer invested in it being a thing that you worry, a profession or an objective that you're worried constantly about making it to the very top or pleasing other people.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing is handing that over now, dispensing with those concerns and handing over your work to a higher purpose. Do you know what I mean? Like, so and that means you don't feel these internalized pressures and drives and self-criticisms that come with perfectionism, because essentially you're going to work and then you're allowing yourself to switch off, safe in the knowledge that you've done something good.
It's really good. The other one that stood out to me, what you brought up earlier, is this perfectionism expectation of others. And I think it might show up in two areas. It could show up as a parent, right, over your children. And then it could show up to those that are leading an organization, that you expect your teammates, your employees to show up in a perfect way when obviously they can't and you don't. And I can see that in myself. I see that sometimes when I interact with my team, that any sort of thing, I'm like, come on, guys, but look, we're human. And then
Yeah.
I'm a parent of a 12-year-old. There are times that I know that my expectation of her is above my expectation for myself. What would you teach me around that?
Well, leading an organization and being a parent involve very similar skills, actually.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it is really about creating a workplace culture that allows room for testing and trial and error, for experimentation, for being wrong, and asking what might be considered, I don't know, silly or stupid questions. Those are things that we shouldn't have any fear about in the workplace. And it's our job as leaders to make sure that it's communicated that it's a safe place. Just ask any questions. No one's judging you. Mistakes are normal. They're very human. We do them all the time. I make mistakes. And if you make a mistake, be sure that you're normalizing that mistake, laughing about it with your team members. And the reason why this is important, a lot of people will say, well, don't we need high pressure, high stakes in the working environment in order to produce high levels of performance? Look, there's nothing wrong with standards and expectations. Those are really good things, but they have to come with a culture of safety. Otherwise, people will be scared to make mistakes. They won't declare things. They'll procrastinate, and all those things hit the bottom line. Right? They impact on productivity, they impact on client relations, and they hit the bottom line. And that then feeds back into a more toxic workplace culture that creates more defensiveness, more worry and aversion to making mistakes, which then feeds back into productivity and the bottom line and so forth. So perfectionism can be really problematic in the workplace, really problematic. No problem with having high standards. This is something that's often confused with what I'm saying about, providing a culture of safety. Nothing wrong with high standards, but you have to make sure you're normalizing mistakes. You're providing a safe environment for people to experiment and take risks, because that's where the innovation happens.
All right, so let's say that you're someone that's either parented in a way or led in a way that this culture of perfection, of being perfect, is out there. It's already there. And now you recognizing that and you want to reset. What advice would you give somebody?
You've got to be open and honest about your experiences within that workplace culture. It's no good letting it just occur, and that's going to be bad for you. It's also going to be bad for the organization, because you're not going to be motivated, and as a consequence, that's going to be just as damaging as high levels of perfectionism in the workplace. So I think it's important to speak up. I think if there are things that you see that you think are problematic, or that are unrealistic, particularly when it comes to expectations or demands that are being placed on you, you have to provide evidence and document why it is that those things are unreasonable in a very calm but assertive way, to make sure that your point is heard. And ultimately, look, it's up to you too to decide that if those things aren't making a difference, if people aren't listening to you and things aren't changing, that maybe that culture or that workplace is not the right place for you to be at also. And you do have to think seriously about those things too. And if you don't feel like you need to be met, or you feel like it's a suffocating environment, then it might be a time to maybe look elsewhere. But that is the final resort. Before that, I think it's important to speak up and be assertive.
This is really good. All right, so you wrap up the book by talking about how we can embrace imperfection. And again, I have a concern for high achievers and entrepreneurs for the ability to do that. What are some tips you'd give about embracing imperfection, and, as you say, in the republic of good enough?
Well, that's why there's a two-pronged problem, right? You've got the individual, and then you've got the culture and the social context, and the two have to marry, because if they're in divergence, then there's going to be a lot of conflict. So within organizations, just as you have to create a culture of safety, as individuals, we have to immerse ourselves in that culture and really take it on. So, and what that means is to challenge our perfectionistic beliefs, put them under a microscope, so to speak. Perfectionists catastrophize a lot. And if you're in a culture of safety, then that gives you a little bit of space, a little bit of permission to just experiment a little bit. So write your fears down. Why is it that you don't want to take on this project? Or why is it that you don't want to give this talk? What is the thing that you're catastrophizing about? And what is so terrible about that? Write it down. And then ask yourself, okay, well, how can I avoid those things happening? What strategies can I put in place? Write them down, and then ask yourself in your mind, what if the catastrophe does happen? Often it doesn't, but let's say it does. How would you rectify the situation? How might you get yourself back to square one so you can start to go again? And again, write it down, reflect on those actions. And then once you've done that, go ahead and do it. Feel that fear and do it anyway. That's the only way you can really break through perfectionism, is by exposure, is to push yourselves in those uncomfortable positions, having reflected on what could go wrong and how you might repair it, and go out there and do it. That's the biggest single piece of advice I give people.
It seems like just a little bit of preparation can go a long way. Just acknowledging whatever it is that you're feeling, and then thinking ahead and possibly problem solving for a problem that likely doesn't exist anyway, but now you have an answer in case it does pop up, will help the fear drop some and allow you to take action. That's effectively what you're saying.
Exactly. And the more you take action, the more comfortable you become, and the easier it gets, and the less perfectionism impacts your life.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm excited because you are going to join our Inspire Collective community coming up here in about a week or so to walk through some of the perfection trap. In fact, Inspire members, I bought all of you a copy of the book. So if you haven't picked up your book yet, go find the link in the emails I've sent, and in the Facebook group it's posted. So Inspire members, get your book because I bought you a copy. But Thomas, give us a preview of what our Inspire members are going to experience with you coming up on July 9th.
I'm super excited. So we're going to talk about a little bit more about perfectionism, delve into some of the themes we've talked about, and elaborate on them. I'm going to talk about what perfectionism is, those 3 elements of perfectionism. I'm going to talk about what it does to us, both in terms of mental health, but crucially in terms of our performance, because there's some interesting research there that has some unexpected results. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how we as organizations and as individuals can point our compass in a different direction.
That's really good. I'm excited about it. So if you're not an Inspire member and want to participate in these types, we've got Thomas for an hour on that day. You can go to my website, which is jamesdshaw.com, and join the Inspire Collective. It's $99 a month. We meet every Tuesday at noon Eastern to talk about stuff to help us in our business, and then have, oh, you're on this side, have really cool people like Thomas come join us. And I buy you books from time to time. Thomas, final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I would say don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I know it's a cliche, but it's very true. The research bears that out. So reconnect with your vocation, find the passion, actually what you do, because it's so important.
We're excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today inside Pivot Shift Ahead. We'll see you in Inspire here soon, and have a good one, Thomas. Thank you so much.
Thanks, James.